Is Henny Youngman. Married 41 years. We went back to Chicago, same hotel where we got married. Had the same suite of rooms. Only this time I went in the closet and cried. A lot of people say, how do you stay married for 41 years? Here's the secret. My wife and I go to a romantic restaurant twice a week. A little candlelight, a little wine. She goes Tuesdays, I go Fridays. My wife hates housework. I bought electric iron, electric dishwasher, electric dryer. She said, too many gadgets around, she had no place to sit down. What did I do? Bought her electric chair. You must compromise. You must compromise when you're married. She wanted a fur coat, I want an automobile. We compromise. I bought her a fur coat, we keep it in the garage. She found a furrier who does his own breeding. He crossed a mink and a gorilla. Got a beautiful fur coat, but the sleeves are too long. I got a mother-in-law, I got to tell you, she raises parrots. She raised a 400-pound parrot. The parrot says, Polly wants a cracker. Now! We're going to Israel for a honeymoon. Incidentally, when I go to Israel, and Your Honor, Ed, I'm having a tree uprooted. There's two Israelis want to knock off Nasser. They want to kill him now. Now watch him every day for a month. Nasser passes this restaurant, 12 o'clock noon. 1 month they watch him. Every day he passes there. Now they're all ready with the bazookas, the guns. They got everything ready. 12 o'clock Nasser don't pass. 12:30 Nasser don't pass. 1 o'clock Nasser don't pass. So one Israeli says to the other one, gee, I hope nothing's happened to him. Say, two guys meet one, says, what's the latest dope on Wall Street? He says, my son. A man brings his boss home for dinner. A woman lets him in. He says, was that your wife let us in? He said, would I hire a maid that ugly? Two guys meet one, says, how's your children? He said, I haven't got any children. He said, what do you do for aggravation? Little old man gets hit by a car. The cop props him against the wall, covers him up with a blanket. He says, you comfortable? He says, I make a nice living.
Good morning. It is Friday, March the 7th, and this is The True Conservative. Welcome to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. I'm Ron, your host and the only true conservative in the United States today. So today, after the Serenity Prayer and the Star Spangled Banner, we will have no free lunch, government contracts, clear communication, Tucker Carlson, the rape of the mind, George-Lakoff, commentary, and Donald Trump. All that and more when I get back. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen.
Ladies and gentlemen, please remain standing and remove your hats for the national anthem of the United States of America.
So proudly we have
Thank you. And now, No Free Lunch, 250 Economic Truths by David-Bahnsen.
Private property is a natural fruit of labor, a product of intense activity of man, acquired through his energetic determination to ensure and develop with his own strength his own existence and that of his family, and to create for himself and his own an existence of just freedom, not only economic, but also political, cultural, and religious. Pope Pius XII. This mid-20th century pope understood what John Paul II would understand so well just 25 years later. That contra the Marxism of the 20th century, private property facilitated the human things. Rather than being corrosive to the soul, the human activity that stewarding private property created was good for the whole being of man in multiple facets of life.
And that was There's No Free Lunch by David-Bahnsen. Back in a minute. Thank you. So it must be a slow news day because listening to a clip of Tucker Carlson on his Instagram account, and he had a piece that was untypically whiny and complaining. He sounded more like Sean Hannity or Rush Limbaugh or one of the Republican talk show hosts than the usual Tucker Carlson, where he was basically complaining that NPR is upset, and on Twitter, all of their NPR's tweets have a little addendum put on them by Twitter announcing that NPR is a government agency. And NPR doesn't like that. They are trying to make it sound as though they're not a government agency. And for whatever reason, I would suspect it has to do with money, but that's a subject for another time. The point is that Tucker Carlson was going on and whining about it and complaining. It was like a 15-minute segment. I didn't even go halfway through it. It was boring, and it reminded me of that somebody that was looking to fill airtime. He had nothing else to talk about. And most of these Republican talk show hosts, they're doing things off of the news. So whatever they get on CNN or MSNBC or the LA Times or whatever their news sources are, and they're looking to them for material to fill airtime. And so apparently it's a slow news day. Maybe it's been a slow news week because he has nothing that he needs to talk about other than whining and complaining that NPR doesn't like being called a government agency. It also sounds exactly like emails I get from the RNC. The RNC sends me emails like that all the time. Hey, Ron, guess what terrible thing is happening now? You need to send us money. But Tucker Carlson can do better than that. And I hope he does in the future. Back in a minute. Thank you. So thinking about queer theory and CRT and all this Coke and Amex stuff. And a lot of the Republican people are getting this way wrong. They're not even bothering to analyze and try to figure out why all of this is happening before they make recommendations. For instance, Bud Light and this big call to boycott Bud Light. Notice that they say Bud Light, not boycott Anheuser-Busch. All right, so it's stupid right there. And they just get stupider as it goes along. Stop and think about it. Why is it that all of a sudden these companies are willing to go queer, for lack of a better term, right? When Donald Trump was president, none of this was happening. Do you really think it's a coincidence that when the Biden administration takes over, that all of a sudden these companies are rushing to go queer? I don't. Stop and think about it. Coca-Cola, for example. I don't know that Bud Light is this way, but I'm guessing that it must be. But I know Coca-Cola has government contracts. They have Coke machines on military bases. They serve Coca-Cola in the NCO club. They serve Coca-Cola at the Chow Hall, etc., etc. So it's very easy. Biden tells his Secretary of Defense, you need to get Coca-Cola to queer up or tell them that we're going to consider canceling the contract. Okay? Now, what this means for you and me is when some asshole on the radio says, hey, we need to boycott X, let's say Coke. We need to boycott Coke. Quit drinking Coke, because there was a slight half-ass move to do that. How much difference do you think that's going to make? And as I've argued before, none, zero. It's not even going to show up on their bottom line. 5 people boycotted Coke. Who cares? But you know what they do care about? Government contracts that are worth tens of millions, hundreds of millions, or maybe even billions of dollars. That will affect their bottom line. If the government shuts Coke off tomorrow, then they're going to have a hard time explaining to their shareholders why it is that they're not making a profit this quarter. Okay, so when you go up against the federal government, you and I are out here with our little boycott. We got our huge list of all these items that our leaders on the radio have told us to boycott. And so now we can't actually eat or drink anything except for water and dirt. And then we expect to make a difference, but we're up against the government, the federal government. The federal government with a multi-trillion-dollar budget. And law enforcement, FBI, ATF, all kinds of federal law enforcement, et cetera, all kinds of power and money. And you and I are supposed to scare the crap out of Coca-Cola by deciding not to buy a 6-pack of Coke. Are you serious? Is Sean Hannity and the rest of them really, really that stupid? Back in a minute. Thank you. Example of our culture gone awry. So I received an email from somebody, and it was in response to a sign-up. I'm involved in a group that just asked for us to, the members of the group, to bring something to a potluck. And so I sent an email back to the individual that sent me the email and told them what I was planning on bringing. So then I get this email back from the individual. I think you only sent this to me, not the entire group. Smiley face emoji. So, and immediately I recognized this for the socialistic miscommunication that it is. This is a person that I don't believe to be truly socialist, but is been brainwashed, as the vast majority of Americans have. Vast majority of Americans have been brainwashed socialist culturally in terms of how they communicate and whatnot. So instead of, because normally you would expect that you're going to get a response. I say, I'm bringing X, and you're going to expect that either they're going to come back and say, oh, you can't because somebody else is bringing it, or thank you. Yes, we appreciate that. Okay. And then if there's any other kind of a problem, that the individual state it clearly. But doesn't. So this is it where I'm supposed to guess at what it is that this individual's getting at. What is this person getting at? What do they mean when they say, I think you only sent this to me and not the rest of the group? And I imagine part of the problem here is the fact that this individual can't use tone of voice, because that's immediately what this reminded me of, what I've talked about, where the left has a tendency in this country, they'll state facts, but they'll use a tone of voice that makes it sound like an accusation, right? So I think that's what she was probably trying to do, but since it's an email, there is no tone of voice. Maybe she would have been better off to include a voice, as to record something and put it in the email so she could use tone of voice to try to shame me or make me feel guilty or whatever her situation is. But anyways, this is the way the left operates, and they've convinced everybody to operate in a similar way, to guess at what everybody else is saying. We guess at what we're saying to each other. We drop hints with each other rather than coming out and communicating directly. This is what I want. This is what I need. This is what you should have done. Okay, maybe what she wants is she's trying to tell me next time, send the email to everyone. But she doesn't say that, so leaving me to guess. So the only thing I can do at this particular point is take the conservative route, pun intended, and tell her, just confirm what she said. She made a statement. I'm going to confirm that statement. Yes, I did. So that's the thing that you got to do. When people say things, and you got to listen. You listen carefully. And when you get a situation, sometimes people, again, they don't want to take. They're too gutless to come out and criticize you. So what they do instead is, again, use tone of voice. But what you can do is be literal, like I did. Just be literal about it. Well, I understand you did this. And if you did do that, you can say, yes, I did. Okay. And that way, the burden goes back on the person it should be on. It's not my job to guess at what it is that you're trying to say. It's your job to communicate clearly and effectively. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, The Rape of the Mind by Joost-meerlo.
Test against these anonymous voices, but nevertheless, their suggestions ooze into his system. What is perhaps most shocking about these influences is that many of them have developed not out of man's destructiveness, but out of his hope to improve his world and to make life richer and deeper. The very institutions man has created to help himself, the very tools he has invented to enhance his life, the very progress he has made toward mastery of himself and his environment, all can become weapons of destruction. The public opinion engineers. The conviction is steadily growing in our country that an elaborate propaganda campaign for either a political idea or a deep freeze can be successful in selling the public any idea or object one wants them to buy, any political figure one wants them to elect. Recently, some of our election campaigns have been masterminded by the so-called public opinion engineers, who have used all the techniques of modern mass communication and all the contemporary knowledge of the human mind to persuade Americans to vote for the candidate who is paying the public relations men's salaries. The danger of such high-pressure advertising is that the man or the party who can pay the most can become, temporarily at least, the one who can influence the people to buy or to vote for what may or may not be in their real interest. The specialists in the art of persuasion and the molding of public sentiment may try to knead man's mental dough with all the tools of communication available to them. Pamphlets, speeches, posters, billboards, radio programs, and TV shows. They may water down the spontaneity and creativity of thoughts and ideas into sterile and streamlined cliches that direct our thoughts, even although we still have the illusion of being original and individual. What we call the will of the people, or the will of the masses, we only get to know after such collective action is put on the move, after the will of the people has been expressed either at the polls or in fury and rebellion. This indicates again how important it is who directs the tools and machines of public opinion. In the wake of such advertising and engineering of consent, the citizens' trust in his leaders may become shaken, and the populace may gradually grow more and more accustomed to official deceit. Finally, when people no longer have confidence in any program, any position, and when they are unable to form intelligent judgments anymore, they can be more easily influenced by any demagogue or would-be dictator, whose strength appeals to their confusion and their growing sense of dissatisfaction. Perhaps the worst aspect of this slick merchandising of ideas is that too often, even those who buy the experts, and even the opinion experts themselves, are unaware of what they are doing. They are too swayed by the current catchword, management of public opinion, and they cannot judge any more the tools they have hired. The end never justifies the means. Enough steps on this road can lead us gradually to totalitarian. At this very moment in our country, an elaborate research into motivation is going on, whose object is to find out why and what the buyer likes to buy. What makes him tick? The aim is to bypass the resistance barriers of the buying public. It is part of our paradoxical cultural philosophy to stimulate human needs and to stimulate the wants of the people. Commercialized psychological understanding wants to sell to the public, to the potential buyer, many more products than he really wants to buy. In order to do this, rather infantile impulses have to be awakened, such as sibling rivalry and neighbor envy, the need to have more and more sweets, the glamour of colors, and the need for more and more luxuries. The commercial psychologist teaches the seller how to avoid unpleasant associations in his advertising, how to stimulate, unobtrusively, sex associations, how to make everything look simple and happy and successful and secure. He teaches the shops how to boost the buyer's ego, how to flatter the customer. The marketing engineers have discovered that our public wants the suggestion of strength and virility in their products. A car must have more horsepower in order to balance feelings of inner weakness in the owner. A car must represent one's social status and reputation, because without such a flag, man feels empty. Advertising agencies dream of universitas advertensis, the world of glittering sham ideas, the glorification of mundus vult decipi, the intensification of snob appeal, the expression of vulgar conspicuousness, and all this in order to push more sales into the greedy mouths of buying babies. In our world of advertising, artificial needs are invented by sedulous sellers and buyers. Here lies the threat of building up a sham world that can have a dangerous influence on our world of ideas. This situation emphasizes the neurotic greed of the public, the need to indulge in private fantasies at the cost of an awareness of real values. The public becomes conditioned to meretricious values. Of course, a free public gradually finds its defenses against slogans, but dishonesty and mistrust slip through the barriers of our consciousness and leave behind a gnawing feeling of dissatisfaction. After all, advertising symbolizes the art of making people dissatisfied with what they have. In the meantime, it is evident man sustains a continual sneak attack on his better judgment. In our epoch of too many noises and many frustrations, many free minds have given up the struggle for decency and individuality. They surrender to the zeitgeist, often without being aware of it. Public opinion molds our critical thoughts every day. Unknowingly, we may become opinionated robots, the slow coercion of hypocrisy, of traditions in our culture that have a leveling effect. These things change us. We crave excitement, hair-raising stories, sensation. We search for situations that create superficial fear to cover up inner anxieties. We like to escape into the irrational because we dislike the challenge of self-study and self-thinking. Our leisure time is occupied increasingly by automatized activities in which we take no part, listening to piped-in words and viewing television screens. We hurry along with cars and go to bed with a sleeping pill. This pattern of living in turn may open the way for renewed sneak attacks on our mind. Our boredom may welcome any seductive suggestion. Psychological warfare as a weapon of terror. Every human communication can be either a report of straight facts or an attempt to suggest things in situation as they do not exist. Such distortion and perversion of facts strike at the core of human communication. The verbal battle against man's concept of truth and against his mind seems to be ceaseless. For example,
So that was the chapter on, let's see here, Public Opinion Engineers from the Rape of the Mind. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now we're going to have the remainder of the chapter, I believe it's chapter 8, from Don't think of an elephant.
Each of the following court decisions violated this essential property of corporations by automatically attributing to corporations certain of the constitutional rights held by shareholders, namely constitutional rights of due process, free speech, seen as money contributed to political campaigns and spent on the media, freedom of religion, and freedom from unreasonable search and seizure and double jeopardy. Bear in mind the Mitt Romney quote from the 2012 presidential election. "Corporations are people, my friend. Everything corporations earn eventually goes to people." He neglected to say which people. In 1889, the court overtly granted due process protections of the 14th Amendment to corporations. In 1893, it was Fifth Amendment protections of double jeopardy. In 1906, Fourth Amendment protections from unreasonable search and seizure. And in 1978, the First Amendment right to make contributions to ballot initiative campaigns. In the latter case, the metaphor was extended. Though a corporation could not go to the polls and vote, as a person it has the right of free speech since its shareholders have the right of free speech. Then a further metaphor. Speech as money going to campaigns, not for candidates, real people, but for policies affecting corporations. It was a step toward Citizens United. Interestingly, Citizens United is not directly about corporate personhood and does not depend on that general metaphor. It depends instead on two other metaphors. Money is speech. Non-persons have the right to speech. These two metaphors form a logic. People have a right to as much speech as they want. Since money is speech and non-persons have the right to speech, it follows that non-persons have the right to spend as much money as they want on elections. This 5-4 vote by a conservative court was politically motivated. Corporations have much more money to spend on political campaigns than do unions. This ruling gives a huge amount of money to conservatives and hardly any to progressives. Speech, as we have seen, is not just sounding off. If framed and targeted carefully, Citizens United allows conservatives to change the brains of biconceptuals and win a lot of elections for conservatives and move the country radically to the right. The Hobby Lobby and Wheaton cases were conservative victories as well. The Hobby Lobby verdict granted First Amendment freedom of religion rights to corporations that are tightly held and operated by a family or small group, more than half controlled by at most 5 persons. The right given is a new right, to ignore a provision of a law applying to a corporation if the small group of individuals owning or controlling the corporation feel that the law violates their religious principles. This is a new and very different metaphorical extension of corporations are persons to First Amendment rights, and it opens the floodgates to a huge range of claims to be exempt from provisions of the law on grounds of religious principle as self-defined. In short, it puts corporations above the law. It is a step toward legalizing government by corporations. This is a radical conservative political decision. Why? Because radical conservatives want to eliminate public resources and public aspects of government. That is, government by laws passed by human legislators. At once, this shifts government from the public to the private sphere and from the human to the non-human sphere. This brings us to another truth unframed in public discourse. Corporations govern our lives. There have been many great innovations made by corporations when they have invested their exponentially accumulated wealth in innovations that improve people's lives. In useful computer technology, telecommunications, pharmaceuticals, and medical equipment, transportation, in area after area. To my knowledge, in all cases, these innovations that have improved our lives were ultimately made possible by public resources. Government-sponsored research and university training made possible computer science, satellites, medical research and training, and so on in case after case. Every great corporate innovation story simply burnishes the truth that the private depends on the public. But what is left conceptually unframed and therefore unspoken are the negative effects of the runaway accumulation of corporate wealth. Here is a short list. Increasing corporate lobbying and political contributions. These effects work largely against the public interest on a huge range of issues, even to the extent that corporations write laws introduced by the legislators they contribute to. The Citizens United decision greatly exacerbated this effect. Increasing externalization of costs. The wealthier corporations get, the more power they have to use their political influence to avoid regulations. As a result, they can pass along to others the costs of doing business, and thus increase profits even more. The fancy name for this is externalization of costs. A prime example is the dumping of hazardous waste that taxpayers will pay to clean up, or will suffer with. Consider what happens when fracking companies dump pools of polluted water on the landscape, or tear up the land in the fracking process and then leave it torn up, or inject vast amounts of poisonous chemicals in the porous shale rock next to the water table, thus creating polluted drinking and agricultural water. The burden is shifted away from the private corporations and to the public. The prime example, of course, is of corporations emitting the greenhouse gas pollution that has caused global warming. The costs get dumped onto you, whether you're paying more taxes to mitigate climate change or to clean up after severe storms, or you're paying more for vegetables during severe droughts. But even when you have to spend your time searching a company website or waiting on the phone to talk to a customer service representative, costs are being externalized. Your time is being spent while the company profits by hiring too few people in customer service. Various forms of self-service at gas stations, supermarkets, and big box stores are made to sound like conveniences for you, but they are really ways of making you work for the company for free. Increasing costs to consumers due to monopoly ownership. For example, some internet providers with no competition may overcharge and provide minimal service, leaving the customer to bear the burden of exorbitant costs and poor service. Limitations of size options by clothing manufacturers. Many clothing manufacturers will only make sizes that fit the most normally sized people because it is more profitable than providing sizes for the full range of customers. Increasingly unethical business practices. For example, General Motors sold cars with known defects that caused deaths, while people in the company knew of the dangers and kept silent. Increasing corporate inefficiency. Anyone who has worked in a large company is familiar with corporate inefficiency. See the Dilbert comic strip. Health insurance companies, for example, have inefficiency costs that are very high compared with Medicare. Those inefficiency costs are transferred to consumers whenever possible. Increasing corporate management pay and the pressure for short-term profits. When the very rich get exponentially richer and everyone else exponentially loses access to wealth, there is an inevitable pressure for short-term profits. When corporate managers are in charge of managing corporate wealth, there is an incentive for them to acquire exponentially growing wealth. To a large extent, corporations govern us and run our lives, for their profit, not ours. The list could go on and on. To a large extent, the runaway expropriation of wealth pointed out by Thomas Piketty is the result of government by corporation. Piketty points out that a political solution is necessary, but when our politics is governed significantly through lobbying by corporations rather than the public, the possibility of this is greatly reduced. Conservatives like to rail against government as taking away their liberty. But government by corporations probably does far more to take away such liberty. Government by corporation is a major, unframed reality. It is systemically linked to the runaway accumulation of our wealth by the very wealthy. Because of the systemic effect of runaway personal and corporate wealth on our politics, both are systemically linked to the threat of global warming to the future of our planet, and to the fundamental split in our politics that is systemically threatening democracy in ways that are not obvious, and are therefore also unframed in public discourse.
Thank you, Mr. Lakoff. So that was Chapter 9 of the book Don't Think of an Elephant by George-Lakoff. And I'm going to go ahead and make a comment here in a minute, back in a minute. Thank you. So about Don't Think of an Elephant by Dr. George-Lakoff, PhD. But he's I don't know, there's a saying that he's so full of crap his eyes are brown. So again, he spends a lot of time putting out details, which is one of his tricks, and then hoping that you're going to accept those details as facts, because then he has now sold an arbitrary statement. Now you're going to try to disprove the unproven, which is impossible. So, and more specifically, one of the things he talks about is biconceptual. And so this is a word he made up. There is no such thing as the biconceptual individual. He says that there's basically two ways of thinking, and it's hardwired into your brain, because he doesn't believe in your mind, only your physical brain. And this is materialist. And that things are hardwired, and you're either hardwired one way or you're hardwired the other, or there's a third option, and that's the biconceptual, which I suppose is the intellectual equivalent of an independent, right? And so, because he's always talking about getting the biconceptuals to be on your side, just like they do in politics. You want the independents. The Republicans play to their base. The Democrats play to their base and secure their base on each side, and then they look to the independents to get the extra votes they need to get elected. But anyway, so biconceptual doesn't float. It's a metaphor, and really what we're talking about here is human beings know and understand things through the use of their mind, through the use of their senses and the use of their mind, and they learn things. And they are able also to acknowledge mistakes. That when they've made a mistake and they've done something wrong, they're able to say, that's wrong, I need to do things correctly, and correct their mistakes. That's the way it works. Biconceptual is not the issue. The only issue is, are you right or are you wrong, intellectually speaking? And if you're wrong, intellectually speaking, you need to get your mind right. Okay, so then he's also talking about the radical conservatives. That was one of the things that he likes to drop in there is radical conservatives. Anything that happens in our society that he really doesn't like, he blames the so-called radical conservatives. Of course, he doesn't say who those are. Who's a radical conservative? No answer. So again, he provides a detail, but that detail should not be confused with a fact, because it isn't. It's just it's really a trigger word. It's really designed to irritate and annoy people. Absent any proof to the contrary, there are no radical conservatives. They just don't exist. So another thing that he wants to go on and on about is, and he was talking about corporate government and saying that we are ruled or being governed by corporations. Hogwash. If you get somebody to try to tell you that, you just say, no, it isn't. No, they don't. Because again, it's an arbitrary claim. It sounds good. It's a slogan. Corporations govern us. It's sloganeering. That's all it is. And so if somebody that you are talking to tries to convince you or actually tries to get you to, again, refute a negative by telling you that the corporations are governing us, you just say, no, they're not. Or prove it. And that'll shut them right up. The other thing is that where you have this kind of an example going on with what he's doing overall. One of the big tricks that the left loves to play is that Hegelian, I've talked about this before, Hegelian idea of creating a problem and then solving it. Right? And that's what he's doing in this book, creating all these problems and then solving them with the use of metaphor by manipulating people mentally, emotionally, getting in their psyche and getting them to think the way he wants them to think. So prime example of this is what happened in Tennessee the other day when Democrats who were in the minority in the state legislature tried to run the organization. They thought that they could get the organization to talk about what it is they want to talk about. They want to talk about so-called gun control. And so of course, the Republican majority wants to talk about something else, and the Democrats decide they're going to try and force Republicans to talk about gun control. And it didn't end up working. So, and good for the Republicans for holding their ground there. But again, it was a situation where the left is making things up as they go along, trying to create a problem and then create a solution for that problem. The problem is, according to them, is that the Republicans won't talk about gun control, and the solution is to talk about gun control. And I'm glad that the Republicans, at least in Tennessee, have seen through that and refused to be intimidated because, of course, they brought their thugs with them to scream and yell from the balconies and try to browbeat Republicans into going along with this nonsense, or browbeat them into cowering and doing what they're told. That's really what it was initially all about. So now two of them, as of this date, two of those three, there were three legislators Democrat legislators that led this group of thugs to making the noise and shutting down the legislature for an hour or two. And two of the three have been voted out. They're no longer members of the legislature. So, and I think, again, good. I'm glad they did. If these individuals want to talk, you got to play by the rules. No matter where you are, whether you're in the legislature or anywhere else, you want to talk, you got to play by the rules. Because if you don't, then nobody's going to listen to you. So it's what I say all the time to people. I say, if you're not going to listen to me, I'm not going to listen to you either. So, and let's see. Oh, and then the other thing is, the last thing, of all the things to cite as a reference, he cites a Dilbert cartoon. He tells us to read Dilbert. That's his big reference. Here's Mr. Lakoff, Ph.D., and instead of citing the encyclopedia, a dictionary, some other type of scholarly work, no, he cites Dilbert. That should tell you everything you need to know about George-Lakoff and his techniques. Now, why then, you might ask, am I playing this book? Simple, because he does get into later on the actual techniques, how to go ahead and use metaphors to great effect. And that's the Democrats aren't the only ones that can play the metaphor game. We can do the same thing. Okay, so that's what we're going to eventually get to, is where he starts talking about how to do metaphors, how to do them correctly and how to do them incorrectly, etc. And again, Republicans can learn something from Democrats. The classic example is Donald Trump. Donald Trump in the 2020 election, instead of coming out and claiming that the Democrats stole the election, he should have taken a page out of the Democrats' book and blamed it on China. Because in 2016, the Democrats said that the election was rigged, that the only reason Donald Trump won and Hillary Clinton didn't is because the game was rigged. But they didn't say the Republicans rigged it. They said that Russia rigged it. Putin rigged it, which is plausible. Everybody knows Putin doesn't like the United States. Russia's not our friend. Russia's been our opponent for a long time. So, that's the situation with regards to... So, Donald Trump should have, instead of blaming the Democrats, simply blamed China. Take a page out of Nancy or Nancy Pelosi in their book, and and Hillary Clinton, who blamed Putin and Russia, but they tied it into Republicans and Donald Trump by saying Donald Trump was a conduit, that Putin wanted to rig the elections and Trump was complicit. If Trump had come out and said it was China that rigged the 2020 elections and that Hunter Biden was complicit, again, it's perfect. It's perfect. The Democrats have got nothing to say. They're screwed. Okay, so that's the reason why I'm playing, the audible portion of this book, is so that you can learn from the Democrats how to do some of these things, because they can come in handy when it comes to defeating the Democrats and the left. Back in a minute. This is Ron, your host, the only true conservative in the United States today, bidding adios to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. So I'm reminding you that the left has no authority, no power, and they can't win.